academically, my journey has been pretty linear. I went to St. Joe's for my undergrad, graduated in 2019, and then went to USC in Los Angeles. Got my master's in applied psychology, which is kind of a hybrid. I know now there is a organizational psych concentration, I think it's called, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is that correct?
Yes.
Cool. So I was actually the guinea pig. Dr. Anastasio and I, it was kind of the brainchild between me wanting to be in psych, but also not wanting to give up the managing human capital, human resources management business side. Um, and we were able to find a pretty good equilibrium. And that's where that concentration initially had stemmed from. And that's what led me to USC because they had an applied psychology program, which was both consumer and employer based psychology. So I was looking at the organizational behaviors and the hierarchies of corporations, but also getting really good research experience in understanding the world of consumers and users. So that was a 1 year intensive kind of fast track master's where you do your dissertation alongside an internship, alongside coursework. So there was kind of it was a three-pronged approach. I really, really enjoyed it. And I think it's ultimately what led me to my career, which is UX research. So I started initially wanting that organizational path. I wanted to be the HR side of corporate, and I wanted to incorporate that psychological testing and kind of cognitive side of the field. But after a semester, I realized that the results of the research are a lot more tangible on the consumer side because there's a lot of confounding variables when you're looking at organizational structures and trying to incentivize employees, right? It could be a good boss, a bad work culture, poor hours, working conditions. Whereas consumers are a little bit easier to quantify, right? Like you have the person bought something or they didn't, or they recommended it to a friend or they didn't. So it was a little bit easier. There was less gray area, which I really, really enjoyed. And the program then was split into consumer insights of market research or consumer insights of user research. And the biggest distinction that I like to say is user research is looking at what people do, and market research is listening to what they say. And oftentimes those will juxtapose each other. A good example that I like to give is with the iPhone in like 2017. They did away with the home screen or the home button. And if you would have done market research and asked a bunch of people, hey, we're thinking about deleting the home button, is that something you'd be interested in? Resoundingly, it would be no. But they were watching what people were doing and seeing how little real estate they had on the screen compared to that lower bottom bar. And they thought it was a good idea based off of user testing and ethnographic research. So that's why I liked user research as opposed to market research. They both definitely have their place in the field, but one is a little bit more intuitive and takes a little bit heavier of a lift and a little bit more of a challenge, which I liked. So after USC, I worked for Curate Retail Group, like QVC, the show, and I was doing behavioral economics. So large scale, what are users doing on the internet? And how do we find, as QVC, find open space, blue ocean markets to grow our customer base? And after about a year, I realized that there was kind of a ceiling and there wasn't much opportunity for growth within the consumer insights department. And I wasn't doing exactly what I wanted to do, right? I was still working with users, but I wasn't going into sessions. I wasn't dealing one-on-one with participants. I was more looking at meta-analysis and large-scale secondary desk research kind of. So I left QVC and I got a job through a connection at my previous master's program, consulting for Google. So I was doing UX research with Google on Assistant, Google Lens, automotive like CarPlay, weather, sports, and for a brief moment on Bard with their AI generative technology. I did that for about a year and a half, and I loved every second of it. It was completely remote, which at the time was really beneficial for myself and my fiance because we were traveling every month. We would go to a new city and we were traveling all over Europe. One of my friends from home actually was playing soccer internationally. And at the time, he was playing for Chelsea. So we got to spend some time in London and I developed some pretty good connections, which ultimately led to me parting ways with the consulting agency, the US based consulting agency that I was working with Google for. They called me back into the office and I said, I'm not going. Right. And I think that's a huge point that I want to emphasize. There's a difference between being realistic and, you know, learning to say no. Because on paper, the market was looking bleaker, but this was an opportunity that I really enjoyed and I grew from, but I had grown out of it in a sense, right? It didn't behoove my lifestyle at that point. And I would encourage everyone to be prepared to wait for a good opportunity. And like I said, be realistic, don't say no to 110 jobs just because, you want to work for Samsung, but choose jobs that you feel you can grow in fields that are well paid and that you feel respected at a company. And if they don't want to adhere to the criteria that you have in your mind as a working environment, then be okay parting ways. So I left my contract with Google in March of last year. And that kind of left me in an open area for exploration because I thought, okay, I know I'm going to be in Europe now. So what do I do? We kind of made the decision for 2 or 3 years. We wanted to stay here. And I thought, well, that's a really good time to get my PhD because at some point I knew I wanted to get a doctorate degree to eventually teach or guest lecture, some sort of interaction in academia. And I approached a couple universities. I chose Oxford, Cambridge, and LSE. And I just cold emailed professors that I had looked up and read their research and thought that's something that I would be interested in. I had a couple meetings with Cambridge. Oxford didn't answer me at all. And I actually found a professor at the London School of Economics that I really, really enjoyed talking to. And I thought we shared a lot of commonalities in the methodologies we like to employ and the research topics that we were interested in. So I ended up applying to the London School of Economics last year around April and was admitted the following month and had moved in a few months after that to a permanent residence in the UK. And that's kind of where I am now. So I'm doing my PhD, writing this dissertation, and I can talk a little bit more about the research that I'm doing later on. But largely, the thing that was missing for me was industry, because I'm taking on this massive 2-3 year dissertation that I'm not going to see the results for a while. And I had already left Google. I didn't burn any bridges by any means, but I stood up for myself and I said, I don't want to go back to the US. So I approached my old manager and said, hey, I'm thinking about joining the industry, but again, I'm not leaving the UK. I'm going to be here permanently for at least 2-3 years. Do you know of any outside opportunities that I could still be conducting UX research, but abroad? And she got back to me and said, there's no work from home contracts available. However, one of my mutual connections from when she went to grad school worked at a company called Bold Insight, which is another consulting agency that's conducting UX research for large tech companies like Google, like Amazon, like Meta. She put me in touch with an individual on their team. And after a couple conversations, we realized that it would be really mutually beneficial for me to take a part-time job working on an hourly basis as a consultant on their team. So now this fall, I am conducting research and guest lecturing at the London School of Economics, being a graduate assistant, as well as working in the industry, which is kind of itching both sides of my professional and academic aspirations, because I get to see tangible research that is conducted in a week and the results are super actionable. And I also get to have my foot in the academic world doing large scale, really methodologically challenging projects that are spanning 2, 3, maybe even 4 years.
Very interesting. Thank you so much for that in-depth kind of walk through your path. And I think it's important to hear, different ways that students can use their psych degree depending on their concentration and area of interest. And I appreciate that, you emphasize that you had that kind of draw to the management corporate HR side initially, and you figured out a way to work that into your degree. So thank you so much for sharing all of that. And kind of going off that last point, at what point when you were in undergrad had you realized that you wanted to stick on that side of psychology? Like, what made you even know that world existed out there?
Yeah. And just, being completely candid, freshman year I was running track for St. Joe's my freshman year. And I had a meeting, like an advisory meeting in the fall with Dr. Anastasio. And she basically said, you are not doing well in the psych department. For my core classes, I wasn't that involved, and I wasn't really that interested, right? There was a really big emphasis on clinical psychology, and I knew that I wanted to help people, but not in a clinician's environment. So instead of being like, look, you're better suited for the business school, pop on, across Sweeney and go and sign up for business classes. She said, I understand that you really are enjoying some courses and not others. So let's craft something that is beneficial for you and lets you explore avenues of psychology that aren't traditionally offered at St. Joe's. And I think that speaks volumes to the level of empathy that the professors at St. Joe's have for the success of their students. They're willing to literally create new concentrations and spend hours ideating curriculum for a handful of students, if not one.
Yeah, that's very interesting just to hear about, that honest conversation that you had. It probably would have been easy for her to say, like, you'd be better suited in a different major, in the Hobbs School of Business, but she was able to help you tie, your areas of interest with your interest in psych, which doesn't always have to look clinical. There are other ways to pursue the degree. So switching gears a little bit, talking more so about like looking for opportunities and looking for jobs, or, applying to graduate school programs. What skills would you, say are most important when you're early on in your career and you're looking for, whether it's your first opportunity out of school, being grad school, or a full-time job? What skills would you say are really crucial and important?
Yeah. The biggest thing for me, I'm sure this is not common just from my peers that have gone through application processes. I applied to one school for undergrad, I applied to one school for my master's, and I applied to one school for my PhD program. And the reason why is because I invested time and energy into the people that were at those schools. And going forward, post grad, even in the workplace, don't find companies or schools that you think would look good or that you care about. Find people and make them your friends first, because if you befriend someone, then you're asking a favor. And that favor is, can you help me through this admissions process? Right? Instead of just knocking on the door of a university and saying, here's my application with no ties. It truly is the saying, who you know, but you can create who you know. And I think that networking is far and away the best tool that I've used to get to the places that I've been, because my undergrad GPA was a 3.1, 3.2. My GRE scores were like, I don't know, 83rd, 84th percentile. And I basically networked my way into top 10 graduate schools, top 5 doctoral schools globally, solely based off the fact that I was willing to go and become more than acquaintances with the individuals that I wanted to study under. My spring break, so junior year, a lot of my friends went, I think they did like a just college, ended up going to like Cabo or something, right? I went out to LA and spent 2 days shadowing the professor that I wanted to study under for my master's. And in no way do you need to financially obligate yourself to do that. But no one else in the program even thought to visit the school and meet with the professor that they'd like to study under. They had, Zoom or like emails, but none of them took the time to go to the university. And I think that making sure you are in the forefront of applicants in the administrator's mind as a person is extremely beneficial. And even with jobs, right? Don't go for companies that you like or positions that you want. Become friends with people that are successful in your field and leverage those connections to find positions.
Thank you so much for bringing up networking and placing an emphasis on it. I think it's something that we push a lot here from the Career Center and when we're helping students with their professional development, regardless of their path. And we really, talk a lot about networking and how important it is and how it sets you apart as a candidate compared to ones that just apply and hope to hear back.
I think, truthfully, I didn't understand what networking was in undergrad. I didn't know that that's what I was doing, right? Like, make a LinkedIn account and email 5 people a week. And of those 5 people that seem interesting to you, hopefully one will respond and say, literally just invite them, say, hey, I think what you do is awesome. Would you be willing to chat about your experiences? Right. And just have those calls. I didn't realize that that was networking, right? I thought networking was, I have my jacket and my suit on and I'm going to like the business fraternity, like networking event, or like the Hawk networking events, and talking to as many people as I can with my name tag on, like the career, was it like career convention?
Career fair, yeah.
Career fair, yeah. Like those types of rinse and repeat networking events. And I'm not knocking them. I think great things can come out of them, but find ways to individualize yourself with people, really get to know people.
Yeah. There are additional, ways to network outside of what people traditionally think of. It could be like a dinner table conversation, sitting next to someone that you don't know who potentially could help you out in the future. So taking you back to like your time at St. Joe's and asking for just some, advice on like what experience, whether it be on campus, getting involved here or externally internships, do you think or would recommend students pursue while they're here to help them prepare for their future career?
Yeah. Uh, I will say Philly's a smaller city than you think. Like, really good examples. My internship junior year, I worked at the airport doing human resources and like data analytics, right? Very unique job. I was able to speak a lot and I had like direct impact. I ran like town hall meetings. It was super, super cool. I got that internship because at 3 a.m. after going out, I was in line at Pat's Cheesesteaks, and the person behind me and I started talking. And it turned out that his daughter was the VP of human resources at the airport. Right. And like we talked about so many other things. Like he was about to set me up with an internship at the zoo, just random things. Right. So, like, meet people, talk to people. Another really good example is there's a alum Blaze Nevels, who was on a flight, and he was on a flight from Tampa back to Philly, and the person that sat next to him worked at Barstool. Blaze got an internship doing video editing at Barstool Sports, met Paddy Plimbett, who's like a UFC fighter, and now has lived in Liverpool for the last 2 years doing content exclusively for him, right? So again, it's going to come out of the woodwork, but if you don't present yourself and just talk to as many people as you can, some of those opportunities, as out there, as distant as they may seem, you could miss.
Exactly. Okay. And what would you say is one thing you wish you knew about specifically your career in your industry as like a senior at St. Joe's? Like one thing you would go back and tell yourself?
You probably won't know what you want to do, but more importantly, you won't know that what you're doing exists. I had no idea what user research was. I didn't know that until 6 months before I applied to my first job. So don't worry about what you think your job title is going to be in a year or 2 years, because oftentimes the industry that you're going to discover your passion in, you haven't even come across or encountered yet.
Right. Yeah, there's a lot of pressure to have it exactly figured out when you're graduating and know exactly what your career path's going to look like, your job is going to look like. But a lot of the times it's 6 or 7 jobs down the line and you've, just started to figure it out. You've just started to learn about what's out there and what exists.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I'm going to ask you a couple questions just that the students, after looking at your LinkedIn, have for you. So can you speak a little bit to the difference between going to school in the United States versus going to school abroad? You're, getting your doctorate degree in the United Kingdom and have experience from master's and undergrad here. So would love to hear a little bit about differences or things like that.
Yeah. I think it depends on the program. And I know that's kind of a cop out, but like, again, just being as transparent as I can, I looked at PhDs in the US, but the reason why I didn't apply was because they traditionally take longer, and I didn't want to do that. So PhDs in the US normally take 4 to 6 years. The London School of Economics offers a program that you can finish in 2 to 3, right? And I'm always one to emphasize efficiency, um, and it's a really, really good program. But I knew I didn't want to be drowning in coursework, and LSC's PhD program is very much focused on your dissertation. You're here to become an expert in a specific field, gather all of the industry relevant knowledge that you can, and be a pioneer in whatever topic that is. You have to create something that's has extreme levels of nuance and will shed light on a part of the research world that is relatively untouched. So that always enticed me when I read about PhDs in the UK, that they were more focused on the dissertation than the coursework.
Interesting. another question more so focused on undergrad. Do you think it is helpful for psych majors to declare a concentration while they're here? Like you obviously said you were more of the guinea pig when it came to the future IO psych concentration, but there's the clinical concentration. Like how important do you think that would be for an undergraduate student to declare?
Yeah. Uh, and this is actually I had this conversation with someone about their master's program. The title of concentration is something that, yields some sort of merit. I'm not discounting that. But you can take courses and have a, self-declared concentration when you are interviewing, right? If you feel like you have spent enough time where you can hold adequately hold good conversations about that field, then there's no reason why in an interview you shouldn't be able to say, my studies involved a concentration in X, Y, or Z, right? Because I think it's important to, not get up there and lie and be like, I graduated with a concentration, but, I've garnered an amount of knowledge that would allow me to be one of the top individuals to talk about this, right? And that takes a lot of interest and it takes a lot of time. And I think that taking courses about specific topics will inherently give you the time and energy needed to become someone that's knowledgeable about that field.
Right. So not necessarily always having to formally declare a concentration, but if you have, the intent and interest to take courses that can be more self-declared, that's always an option too.
Yeah.
Awesome. So talking a little bit more in depth about like your work and role as a user experience researcher, speaking to, and I know you've been in consulting spaces a lot, but which kind of garners like no day probably looks the same for you, but can you talk about, what a day looks like as a user experience researcher and like what you would say the key responsibilities of that role are?
Yeah. And to be honest, the best way to describe what I do, no day looks the same, but many days are the same, in the sense that I have weekly projects and they run on about a 7 workday cadence. So stakeholders will come to me with a question, as simple as we're trying to figure out if the drop down menu should be bold or plain text, right? Or they could be like, we're trying to reinvent the entire shopping experience using interactive gleams or something, right? Like some sort of really far-fetched concept that's going to be super exploratory. Either way, when I get into that meeting, I say, okay, what are the top 5 things that you would like to learn? And they tell me what those top 5 things are. And I say, okay, cool, I can promise you 3, right? That conversation will take place on a Thursday or Friday traditionally as consultants. Monday, you're going to write a mod guide, which is like the script for the interviews that you're going to conduct. You're going to have a dry run. You're going to do a fake interview with the prototype that you're using and a fake participant. Tuesdays and Wednesdays, or sometimes Thursdays, are going to be session facing days. You're going to be talking to like 9 to 12 people, all for an hour each, and running experiments. You're going to be testing out the features, understanding where they get frustrated, where they find enjoyment, what could be better, what their recommendations are, all those good things. You're going to be taking notes on it, and then you're going to synthesize all of that data, the 9 hours, 12 hours, whatever it is, of participant data that you've collected. You're going to take all of it. You're going to learn the nuances of it, figure out what the recommendations would be, and then present it and build out a deck on Thursday or Friday and present it to the stakeholders. So it's basically running research experiments end to end. It's like the senior seminar, but just like in 1 week, right? And then the next week you're doing a whole different one.
Great. And since starting in the field in user experience and thinking about your first role to now, how has user experience research evolved? And how do you see it kind of developing in the future?
Yeah, I think it will be relatively untouched, particularly by AI, because it's qualitative research. Like you need to be interacting with a participant and guiding them through tasks, which is hard to do for AI, right? I mean, like surveys can be distributed by AI, created by AI, analyzed by AI, but the way in which humans interact with other humans and the study of that and the study of which humans interact with products, you kind of need to be participant facing. So I don't see any change in that realm, but I think that the industry is becoming a little bit more saturated as people are finding out that the pay is significantly higher than that of other social science jobs. I know, and again, I'll be as transparent as I can because I wish someone would have told me these things when I was trying to decide what I wanted to do, right? I think industrial organizational psychologists on average are making like 89 to like 93, I want to say, for like 5 to 7 years of experience. My first UX research job, the average income of the researchers in my pool, in my cohort, my hiring cohort, were 120, right? So like pretty significant. And that's standard across the industry. Very seldom are you going to have entry level that you're looking at below 85, 90. So I think that once and that's, very well known now, as it should be, right? I'm huge on salary transparency. But now that that has happened, there's a lot of sociologists, anthropologists coming into the UX research space, and a lot of people jumping from academia to the research space because they're saying these people are doing what I do every day, right? Conducting experiments, synthesizing data, and relaying it to the general public, but they're getting paid a lot more. So I'm going to join in, right? Which makes it harder for younger researchers to get their foot in the door when you have academics that are coming from heavy research backgrounds, right? And they had 5, 10, 15, 20 years of experience that are more than happy to take that entry level salary because it's equivalent to what they've been getting, right, in their respective field. So I could see the industry getting harder in terms of finding jobs for young researchers, but it undoubtedly will grow.
Okay. So kind of going off that then, what would you say if there was someone graduating who was, found themselves interested in user experience research, and they're finding what you're saying, and like it's harder for me to find a job. I feel like they're giving it to individuals who are more experienced in research. Like, what would you suggest they do? Find
Yeah,
an
absolutely.
internship or something like that.
I think internships definitely are something that could help. It's weird. There's not many that are offered for some reason. I'm not sure why. I think it's probably something to do with the NDAs. Like since you're working with a lot of large tech companies, like sensitive information, sometimes it can be harder to have internships. But again, find friends. Like one of the things that I really focused on during my time at USC was at night I would be on the couch looking on my phone at different apps and things like that, right? Like if I'm playing PlayStation, I'm gonna think I really like this product, I really like this game. Who's the head of their research department, right? Like who's heading or who's a UX researcher, entry level UX researcher at this company? A really good example would be I ordered GoPuff a lot in LA, and I really thought the company as a whole was making phenomenal leaps in the interface that they were having. Like every week they're rolling out new betas for like different ways, like carousels on the UI and things like that. It was really cool. So GoPuff was a Philly-based company, and I cold emailed or LinkedIn messaged a guy, Kyle Romaine, who was at the time a senior researcher that moved up to VP of user research at GoPuff, and said, I'm thinking about getting into UX research. I have a little bit of qualitative experience. I just really think the research that you've done to guide these products are cool because I use them all the time. And I've met with him several times. We've had dinner. Whenever I'm in Philly, I go and see him. So it's something that I've noticed. Making friends in the industry through just looking at products that you use every day is really beneficial.
Yeah. So building informative relationships with people. So it might not be a direct experience, but you made a connection and got good information. So talking a little bit about your PhD program. So I know you mentioned earlier on that getting your doctorate degree was something that you had always thought about and wanted to do. What prompted that for you? Like, is that something that you had known since undergrad? Did something turn when you were in your master's program? How did you kind of come to that? Like, I definitely want to do a doctoral program.
Yeah, I always grappled with it. Like, I really wanted it, but I also knew it was going to be a lot of work, and I wasn't sure when the timing would be right. And I knew I didn't want to be, a second year PhD student with 2 kids and a mortgage and a full-time job. So I knew I needed to get it done. If I was going to do it, it needed to be soon. And what really prompted this kind of leap was I knew that I needed to find something to stay in the UK. And the job market was pretty flimsy. So I was like, it's hit or miss, right? Trying to get a job as an international employee, especially when the market's tough. So I knew that I wanted to get my PhD eventually. And I thought, what's a better way to ensure that you can stay in a country than by being enrolled in a school?
And with your experience now, you're a PhD student, and you kind of talked about like the timeline for that, and also recently starting your position. But it seems like you've always been someone who's involved in more than one thing at one time. So can you talk about burnout? A lot of psych majors, regardless of their path, majority, I would say, do pursue a postgraduate degree of some sort. And I think when you enter into that space, there's a lot of room for burnout and being overwhelmed with the workload. And if you're working additionally on the side, like, can you speak to that regard, any experience that you've had and how you kind of deal with that?
Yeah. And I have, for the most part, always had multiple gigs kind of, just because I'm interested in a lot of things. So it's hard for me to give something up if I really like it. I wouldn't say I've experienced burnout because I'm really good. I pride myself in time management, and I'm more than okay pushing things down the road, if that means it will take. If something's really going to hurt my mental health, I'll say, I'm looking at this tomorrow. And I also block my time. So I work very seldom will I work more than 6 hours a day. And that's just because I have like deep focused time where no one's going to bug me. I'm doing this for 2 hours, 2 hours straight. I set a timer on my phone and that's it. And then I break for an hour. And then I go back in and I do the same thing. Right. So like what really helps me is taking breaks during the day, because that's what I loved at being in school, right? Like your breaks are kind of random. Like with work, you work 9 to 5 and you have a lunch, right? But on campus, you'll see people walking around at 10:30, just getting food or hanging out. And I think having the autonomy to choose when you take your breaks makes the world of a difference.
Yeah, so it's kind of speaking to more so like things you can do in advance to help not experience that burnout. Tips, time management, blocking your time, knowing what as an individual is going to impact you, and taking preventative measures to kind
Yeah.
of push that to the next day.
And being transparent, like I didn't, when I got this gig with Bold doing the consulting stuff, I told them I'm a full-time PhD student, right? So you lay all your cards out on the table and you explicitly say, I can give this amount of time and that's it. And I'm not giving more. And I'm not expected to give more. So just being forthcoming and also, having the discipline to say no to your boss or your advisor uh, is really, really important.
Yeah, transparency, not just with yourself, but with other people, and kind of boundaries and all of that good stuff. What experience or job thus far do you think has been the most formative in your career?
Uh, that's a really good question. I'd probably say honestly the last 3 months of this PhD, because I came in thinking I was going to do a traditional dissertation, and the research that I'm doing is on social media comparisons. So it's comparison theories. Um, Basically, we know that a lot of social media is bad for us, and as consumers, as users, but there's very little research on content creators. So my whole dissertation is on the negative health, mental health implications, and negative well-being of content creators and ways that they try and work around those issues of social comparison. Um, that initially was a really good PhD proposal, but I was confronted by my advisor, who had just written a book, The Perfection Trap. It's out on Amazon. He was on Gwyneth Paltrow's podcast as well. It's a really good book. I highly recommend it. But he came to me in one of our meetings and was like, I think that this has a really big potential to be a free read, to not be something that's published in academics are only reading it. So he introduced me to people at his publishing house, and I'm now writing a book for this dissertation instead, right? It's a monograph. So I'm doing the academic part, but I'm also writing it subjectively because eventually I want it to be published in the next year or two. Um, so that piece is something that's very, very new to me because I've been a researcher, I've been a student, I've been an employee, but I've never been a writer. And that's something that I have grown a lot, and it's taken a large mental toll. So I think that's where I've grown the most because it's not linear at all. Like I'm thrown into the realm of writers that have been writing for a super long time, and I haven't. So I was doing experiments and conducting research and doing statistical analysis for 5, 6, 7 years, right? Like the whole way from initial stats course at St. Joe's. So you really get comfortable and you really feel like you're an expert in that field, as opposed to now it's just I have no idea what I'm doing. So it's helping me grow, right?
Yeah, and I appreciate you emphasizing, throughout this interview, just like the non-linear path that you have had in terms of having different experiences and being in a position where you're embarking on a writing journey where you haven't been writing and you're surrounded by others who have, and at one point that was you in a different area. So I really appreciate you speaking to that. One last question, and kind of just leaving you with the opportunity to share one piece of advice that you have for students at St. Joe's psych majors that you think is important to share.
Yeah. Probably just don't worry as much because 5 years from now, you'll probably have it figured out. Um, And I know that's really hard to do, um, because you live in the moment, right? You worry in the moment, but you set yourself up for success already by going to St. Joe's, by furthering your education, by meeting a bunch of new people. So odds are, if you stay true to what you want to do and what interests you, doors will open and you'll be able to access really unique avenues in your professional and personal adventures.
Yes, I agree. Easier said than done for people who have gone through the experience of being in college and not having any idea of what they want to do. But I think it's
Yeah.
just to remind, just to remind them to
Yeah.
not.
Enjoy because I really like think some of my best friends that I've made have been at St. Joe's. I met my fiance at St. Joe's. So if I could go back, and hindsight's 2020, but if I could go back, I would enjoy the time that I'm surrounded by people that I've grown to really care about. Because after that time, right, it's captured, it's a moment, and after that, you all disperse. So
Thank you so much.
without
And
getting too nostalgic, right?
yeah. Thank you so much for your time and for joining us. I want to check with you. Would it be okay if I shared your email with the students in class just in case they have some questions or are interested in,
Yeah,
potential paths that you took at all?
yeah, absolutely. I'm available there. I'm available on LinkedIn, whatever works.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much again for joining us. Your information and path is super interesting, and we appreciate you sharing it all with us. And we hope you have a great rest of your day.
You as well. Take care.